So before we adopt the agenda, can we confirm that we have a quorum? Emma?
Yes, we're looking to directors. Davidoff and it's Cassidy. Oh no, Davidoff is here. So yeah.
Yeah, you should. You do.
Okay, we do have a quorum. So we have an agenda in front of us. I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda and a seconder. We have it at the board table. There's only three of us here. There's Director Newell and Director McLaren Cole and myself. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Okay, the agenda is adopted as written. And a freedom of the floor for Chair of Central Resource Recovery, Chair Newell, and East Resource Recovery, Chair Jackman. A motion for the freedom of the floor. Moved. Seconder? Seconded. All in favor? Anybody opposed? No opposition. So, Chair Newell, you have freedom of the floor, and Chair Jackman, you have freedom of the floor. We have received the minutes, and anybody notice anything different in the minutes? Would like to make a comment on the minutes? Looking online, looking in at the board table, minutes have been received. So we have a financial plan. I'd like to make a couple of comments on the financial plan before I turn it over to Amy to go through it. I've noticed that, and I'm pretty sure that everybody, or I think everybody noticed, our last year was a projected increase of 8% year after year. This year, we've got a 10% increase. And I attended the Central Resource Recovery meeting the other day, and their projected increase is only 3% year after year. Kudos to Central Resource Recovery. Anyways, and the other thing that I've noticed that I'd like to make a comment in, and probably, more than likely Amy will expand on, is on the tipping fees. You know, projected with 2.4 increase to all tipping fees in 2026, plus 4% for cost recovery. And I'd like Amy to expand on that when we get there. So anyways, go ahead, Amy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. And may or may not be able to see if anyone has questions, so please interrupt me as we go, and we can cover off questions that you may have. So as Director Popoff pointed out, the requisitions this year and each year through the plan have a 10% increase annually. Last year, that was we were projecting an 8% increase annually, so that is a slight increase.
We lost you, Amy.
Yeah, we did.
Did you mute? Oh, she froze it.
Her screen is frozen, so.
Yeah, she mentioned that this could happen. She's going to join us then by mobile phone if that happens. That was the backup plan.
So for questions, I'll ask her whether she wants to go questions line by line, if anybody has any questions. So those online, pretty hard for me to monitor chat, but we'll look at chat. But if you put your hand up, you generally go to the left of my screen here, and I would be able to see and recognize you. So I've got a hand up there, and that looks like Director Davidoff?
Yeah, can you hear me okay,
yeah.
Chair?
Yeah, I can hear you okay, but you had your face covered.
Pardon?
I said, I can hear you okay. I see your hand, but you had your face covered, so I couldn't see you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm looking at the print's really small on the printed version, just like on the screen. So, yeah, obviously, it's something that we're gonna have to look at in terms of the 10% increase, but I'm gonna wait on making any comment on that until we work through all of our questions that we have on what's in front of us. So I'm just gonna hold my comments till afterwards.
Okay, so if you can put your hand down.
Okay, so are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll keep you on my phone. I can see you on the screen, but no video, just to be sure that I don't get dropped again. Okay, so moving through the grants in lieu of taxes, they vary year to year, so that's I don't have a lot of say in that item. The sales of service, so that's our tipping fees. We sent out a letter, I think in October, to all our account holders and municipalities saying that we expected a 6 to 9% increase. What we're proposing here and in all three subregions is a 2.4% increase, which was the CPI inflator that finance directed us to use. And we also had the cost recovery study that we completed at the end of 24. There was two options. One was for a 3-year plan to get to cost recovery, which I think they were generally in the 8% annual increase, or a 5-year plan, and they were 4% for the first 4 years and 3% in the 5th year. So that 4% in this first year here was added to the 2.4 to come up with a 6.4% total increase to tipping fees. So line 12 are our user fees. So that is most of that is our scrap metal. We have seen that market declining, so just reducing the expectation from previous years. Line 14 is the MAR rebate we get for the major appliance recycling. Line 16 through 19 are the different grants. So the organics infrastructure and collection program is finishing in 25. We are working with the sustainability group on a program to install programmable thermostats at a number of our sites, prioritizing bigger, older buildings, ones that are left unoccupied for days of the week, because we want to try and make our buildings more energy efficient. So there's a $20,000 grant that we are working with or aiming towards. And so that would be divvied up between the 3 subregions. And that would be, as far as I understand, entirely grant funded. So that'll be proceeding this year if the grant is approved. We also, at the December joint committee, you'll get the final report on the construction demo renovation diversion pilot. They're aiming for Naksup, and that has $10,000 from the City of Nelson Low Carbon Home Grant and $10,000 from the LG CAP. And so that was also fully grant funded. And then on line 19 are the Columbia Basin Trust grants that Matt has described. So the funding that we previously got for the bear resistant function on the curbside bins for the rural organics curbside, we've repopulated that to fund rural organic diversion, a variety of different programs, and that report came to you guys earlier this year.
Amy?
Yep.
And I bring us for a moment back to the sale of services. Maybe you mentioned it and we couldn't hear it, but I think it's important to point out the projected revenue from sale of service, so from tipping fees, is approximately 145,000, less than budget.
Yes.
The 2006 budget, the 6.4% increase, assumes the same waste same waste amount that we actually receive or project to receive to year end. So that actually puts us, from a revenue perspective, if this is the case, only slightly above the budgeted amount from 2026. So waste down, revenue down. Accordingly, your tipping fee increases don't have quite the same effect as if it would be the same amount as we projected in 2025. Just wanted to point that out.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, and before you go on, this is Chair Popoff. I do have a question. Is the decrease, is that because more compost?
Through the chair, I don't think so, because those programs have been, I mean, some of it I could expect we could see some of that diversion impacting our, but the tipping fees for the compost is also in there on line 6. But all the subregions had a lower tipping fee revenue this in projected for 25, and tipping fees are based on our revenues are based on the material that come across our scale, and there can be a lot of variation in past years. The West, especially at Ootischenia, had very large soil shipments that we tried to account for, so removing those sort of one-off projects from our subsequent year projections. But there could be a variety of things that could impact the amount of material that we get at our sites.
Yeah, the contaminated soils is probably your biggest swings that you have from year over year. You're accepting actually out of region contaminated soil as we speak. So there could be a year-end adjustment here, but by the numbers that we currently have, that's what it is, and the most likely culprit is the swings in contaminated source acceptance.
Okay, thank you. And Director Davidoff has a question. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And actually, I was going to ask exactly that, like why the reduction, and is it got to do with big projects? So do we anticipate any big projects in 2026? Is that like has staff got, through the chair, has staff got kind of any heads up on kind of big projects? You know, because we would know they're coming if, you know, because they would require building permitting and stuff like that. If they're within our electoral areas, but are you anticipating any large contaminated soil or other type of projects?
If I may, through the chair, building permits don't necessarily identify that at all. On top of it, a lot of it is out of region, so we do not hear long time before what kind of volumes we receive, with very few exceptions. So typically it is what it is, and we have to accommodate as these volumes are identified and as we receive applications and quality and analysis material supporting the acceptance of it.
Okay, Chair, I have a comment to make, if that's okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so this reduction is concerning, because the more we divert, it's not concerning, because our goal is that, I mean, at one point we're talking zero waste, so you're not going to get any revenue from zero waste, if everything's recycled and etc. But when we get to the expense section, there's a whole bunch of money that we are looking at spending on second scales, a whole bunch of increases, and you don't do that if you don't anticipate an increase in demand. And when we see a reduction in the sales of services, that's pointing in the direction of reduction. And I get we have closures coming and stuff like that, but the key thing is that are we hurrying into kind of expanding our facilities and waste scales and things like that before we really see what's trending? I get that's kind of what I was thinking, because I got a whole bunch circled in the subsequent pages related to this tipping scale projects and things like that. So I guess the question is that our forecasts for kind of sale of services and the demand for our services accurate, through the chair to staff?
Yes.
So if I may respond to this. So first of all, I think we need to change how we view these materials. The contaminated soils coming to site in a way is cream on top of your normal waste that you receive, is additional revenue that has supported this service over the last 5 years substantially, but it's not something you should build your financial construct on, because it may break away tomorrow. Number two is, from a traffic perspective, contaminated soils receiving is a blip. These are big, heavy units that bring 20 tons at a time in. They are not the number of traffic that generates your lineups at the scale. Your lineups at the scale are, like most of our facilities, are largely created by the, let me call it intentionally, non-profit loads. It's the small residential loads that cost the facility more than it actually generates in revenue. If somebody comes with 2 bags of garbage, the revenue of these 2 bags of garbage is pretty well used up by the time they leave the scale towards the inside of the transfer station. The cost of the transfer station, the staffing, the scale facility, the scale staffing, the road maintenance eats up a lot more than you actually make profit on these small loads. But they are the ones that create your lineups, and they are the ones that in part we need to accommodate unless you change your service model. We are service oriented. Right now we have traffic problems on a couple of our sites, and Ootischenia being one of them. And if we want to accommodate them, then we need to have the facility accordingly. The second scale is exactly that. It allows us a proper and fluid management of traffic that's coming in without the traffic lining up out onto the road. So the facility upgrade is needed from a traffic volume, but it's not related to your large-scale customers. In fact, part of what we are trying to achieve with the upgrade is an accelerated lane for your revenue traffic, for your commercial trucks coming in. So because every truck that sits for 15 or 10 minutes in front of a scale costs whoever is operating that truck a 10-minute truck time. It's lost revenue, both to the hauler as much as to us as a facility. And we likely will attempt to integrate into the planning of the access in Ootischenia a commercial lane that allows an accelerated transition or transfer of these commercial loads into the facility and out of the facility, combined with the right software that allows us to do semi-automated processing. The tear weights of these trucks are known, they are in the scale program, and it is a very fast processing of these loads.
Well, thank you for your question, Director Davidoff.
Yeah,
I've
Chair.
got Director Weatherhead next on the line.
Yeah,
So
just Chair, I just
you're
want,
delving into operations, Director Davidoff, not the tipping or whatever, and your comments are greatly appreciated. And I believe Manager Wolf has told you that told us, I should say, that he's looking into it.
yeah, can you put me back in the speaker list after all the other people have spoken, Chair? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Director Weatherhead, go ahead. You can remove your hand, Director Davidoff.
Thank you, through the chair. Just to note on the decrease in waste revenue, waste is down. To me, it's just a direct sort of connection to our economy right now. We're really not spending as much, I think, as we were before. And so maybe we're just not creating as much waste as we were before. And maybe these numbers are going to be more reflective going forward as to the volume. It may continue to decrease if that's the case, if people are spending less and less. Just my thoughts.
Well, thank you, Director Weatherhead. And the other thing is, as mentioned, we are working towards zero waste. So,
yeah, exactly.
Anyways, go ahead, Amy.
Yes, thank you. The other thing I wanted to point out is we've been describing for a number of years all of the large infrastructure and capital projects coming up at Ootischenia and some of the other sites. And Ootischenia is at a phase right now where we only have a few years at max of filling space before we have to move. And some of, we're kind of the delay in approval of the resource recovery plan and a number of delays we've had with archaeological assessments and such of the site have put us in the position where we're in the design and operation closure phase right now. And we need to move on preparing the next phases of the landfill, or we won't have space to landfill anymore. And so the tipping area that we currently have there has to move. So these are projects that have been in the books for a number of years, and we need to advance on them. This is our regional landfill, and we need to make sure that this is prepared to accept waste for the 2 subregions it services. Within the next couple of years. It's not something we can wait on.
Okay, go ahead and continue with your Director Davidoff. We can have that discussion later. I mean, we're delving into operations and improvement, etc. Let's stick to the budget and let's move forward on the budget. Once we get through, like you mentioned, you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions on operations. Go ahead. Do you have a question that you want me to address right now on the budget?
Yeah, my questions relate to efficiency at the site and ideas for that. And I guess that's operations, but okay, whenever you feel that's appropriate, I'll ask my questions. It has to do with income.
Yes, if you can save them till the end, and then we can have a good discussion on operations. And your comments are well taken by Manager Wolf and I believe Manager Wilson. Go ahead, continue.
Thank you. So we're into the proceeds from borrowing round starting on line 21. Both on line 21 and 28, those were long-term borrowing for the Naksup and Slowdown transfer stations. That the borrowing was to occur in 25 and it got delayed into 26. So that's why it wasn't shown in the budget. When there was a few items here that we had as borrowing in past plans or in early development of this budget. And so the compost facility at Naksup is one that we moved to a regular reserve funded, and the Naksup closure works we moved to be funded by the landfill closure reserve, which is a new reserve we've established. So those were removed from the borrowing. But on line 24, we have borrowing for the general Ootischenia landfill development, and those are 2 projects. Those for now, I would call them more placeholders. When the design and operation closure plan is completed, we'll have a better idea of costs and how that project will be phased. We need to have them in there because there's very good likelihood that they will need to proceed in those years. We just don't know exactly at this point. So for this financial plan, they're placeholders, and by 2027's financial plan, we'll have a little bit more refinement on those. The line 26 is the borrowing for the legacy landfill closures. There's some works that will be occurring before the actual closure works, and that's all being funded by reserves, but the actual closure works, which again are still placeholders, are to be done by borrowing. Line 27 is the Ootischenia tipping area. So we, as the resource recovery plan, allowed us to do long-term borrowing up to 1.5 million. So that is targeted there, but we also have more, as now we have the preliminary design, the costs are higher, and so the funds beyond the 1.5 will be coming from reserve, so that is split funded. On line 30, we have the contribution from interchange, which is the used oil. With the lobbying that we did to both interchange and then the province, they've been interacting with us quite a bit, and we supplied a cost summary of what it takes to co-host them at our non-EPR hazardous waste roundup events. And with the result of the work that staff put into that, they are taking it to their board to increase the grant amount from, which is currently $1,500 per event, to between $2,500 and potentially as high as $3,000. So that was great news and a good outcome from that lobbying. Line 32 is the transfer from regular reserves, and so that is a combination of a variety of projects, capital projects that are not being funded by borrowing or grants or others. Line 33 is what I was just mentioning about the landfill closure reserve that was moved from borrowing for Naksup. Then we have some on line 35 that is transfer from our stabilization reserves. And so that is some of the funding I was just mentioning that will contribute to the Ootischenia tipping area and scale upgrade. And the stabilization reserves, every time we have a surplus by board resolution, half of it goes into the stabilization reserve and half stays in the service. So that's the stabilization reserve was getting fairly healthy, so we wanted to make sure that we were utilizing it and offsetting borrowing costs into the future. So the transfer from other services on line 37, that's the funds that gets transferred from Central for the use of the Ootischenia landfill. That calculation is done every year based on operational expenses and the percentage of the total tonnages that are entered into the landfill. And then we have on line 39 is a contribution from the septage reserve for the service that's provided at the landfill for accepting the septage. And then what we can see on line 45, so you can see in the projected year end for 2025 is quite substantial. That's because there was funds from the asset retirement obligation audit. So there's funds that were previously leaving the service for our landfill liability that has now been put back into the service. It was just held by the general organization. It's been put back into the service to be directly transferred into a landfill closure reserve. And this is something that staff has been working on for some time, because then it is very visible. We can see where it is, ensure that we get the interest from it back in the service. And so that's an accounting exercise that happened through finance and our auditors. And so that those funds you'll see lower down in the budget are getting directly transferred into the landfill closure reserve. Any questions?
Before you continue, Amy, Director Davidoff has a question on revenue. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question's focused on requisition and ratepayer fatigue. And is this the place to ask that question, Chair? Because I'm confused about where I can ask questions.
Is it with regards to revenue? We're on the revenue portion of the budget.
Yeah, it's regard to revenue and how we do this.
Okay, because the next section is going to be in operations, and that's where you make your comments on improvement of operations, etc., salaries, stuff like that. So go ahead with your question, Davidoff. Director Davidoff.
So I go to the Ootischenia landfill, and I have a little mini transfer station in my barn. I have all my recycling in different little bins and stuff like that. And once I have a full truckload, I take my 4 bags of garbage and my recycling. I stand in line at the Ootischenia landfill, and sometimes, because it's usually Saturdays that we go there, and I've been there and it's taken me up to 45 minutes to get through to dump my 4 bags and then go to recycling. And I've talked to so many people who said there's got to be a better way. And so one of the ideas that came up, not originally from me, is they're saying, why can't we have a little thing where we pay for a bag? If we're only coming with 1 bag, there are people come with 1 bag. And 1 bag and a little bit of recycling. Can't we just pay for a bag, put a tag on it, and dump it in a bin and not have to stand in line for the weigh scale? And I says, that's a good idea. And some of the people have done this. Standing in line, they say, hey, I got 1 bag. I'll give you $5 to throw the bag in your load so I can leave. So the key thing is that another way for us to gather revenue is to say, okay, like I know how often I go. I probably go once every month with a full truckload, 4 bags of garbage and recycling. I have no problem buying, 4 tags, $2.50 a bag or whatever it is, tag my bag, dump it in a bin so I don't have to go through the weigh scale. That's the choke point, is the weigh scale. And then on the way out, you got to go through the weigh scale again. Even if you're dumping 4 bags and you just dump your bags or 1 bag, you got to stand in line to come back to be weighed. And they make a note. You only had 1 bag, so it's not the weight, it's charged by bag. So that's the piece that I wanted to raise here, because I know the frustration, and then people are speeding. Once they get done, they're firing out of there, and the language is really not very friendly to our staff. And I talk to the staff every time I go there. Where's the choke point? It's the weigh scale. People coming with 1 bag, and they're standing and waiting. And the lineup is 20, 30 cars sometimes, and trucks. And then you get a big rig come in that needs to use the scale. But I know that probably half the traffic is just a few bags. So I want to raise that here, because if we have some other way of diverting people who can put a tag on a bag, dump it in a bin, and get out of there, that would really help.
Okay, well, thank you, Director Davidoff. Really appreciated your comments on there. And I know you do visit there quite often and you have some good comments there, but we have to move on. And I don't expect staff to answer you immediately. They have listened to your comments and well taken. So I've got another speaker on the agenda here, Director Jackman. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Through the chair, I wanted to revisit line 37. That's the contribution from Central, and there's a note there that it's projected to be reduced because there's less of a burden since they are diverting organics, so Central's tonnage will be less of a burden on Ootischenia that they have to manage. But that's one factor that would reduce that calculation. On the other side, we can see Ootischenia's total volume has gone down, total revenue, sale from all the subregion has gone down. And so the cost per ton is essentially more. So knowing we're not nearly at full cost recovery, does this calculation calculated every year take into account this little downturn in revenues, which means that the amount that West subregion has to pay, no matter what the revenues are to keep that site operational, is more per ton, and so maybe the contribution from Central should actually go up a little bit. How does your calculation work?
Through the chair, the calculation doesn't take into revenue at all, only expenses and the equitable share of those expenses.
Yeah, so somehow Chair Supplemental. West's revenue is necessarily, the shortfall in revenue from West is then covered by West taxation. If that shortfall in revenue is not taken into account in this calculation. Just a thought, it's kind of like my ideas when we were talking about Central, not something that's going to get worked out right away. But if we continue to see a decline in volumes, then West is going to pay more taxation. And shouldn't that somehow be taken into account on Central helping with that?
Well, I through the chair, I'll point out that the West taxation is under 900,000, and their revenue for tipping fees is almost 4 million, and Central is the exact opposite, virtually. And so when we talk about a 10% tax increase in West, you're talking about pennies essentially in comparison to when you have a similar tax increase in Central, and so West benefits a lot from having Central being the landfill. It gets almost all the C&D material. It gets 100% of the asbestos material. West has a serious advantage with the landfill being in their backyard. So I mean, it's something we could certainly look at, but I don't think West is getting disadvantaged by this whatsoever.
I do appreciate West's advantageous position. It's just along the same line of if this trend continues, may only be a few percent, maybe it's 5%, but it is a factor.
So Manager Wolf has a response for you.
The calculation of this amount is relatively complex, but one thing that may be weighing in here is that we have a bit more information on the amount of septage and the solids component of that coming to Ootischenia. That needs to be considered under the overall tonnage on that site. Now, if the overall tonnage goes up and the septage is attributed to the Western subregion, they get as well the revenue from it, then the percentage of the Central subregion goes down. So let's say one area has 10,000 tons, the other has 10,000 tons, but if you now add 5,000 tons of septage, you change the 50-50 to a 40-60 split. And that is part of the picture that you are seeing here. We re-evaluated the amount of septage and the solids content being disposed at Ootischenia, and that is driving, on a percentage basis, the Central contribution down.
Okay, so I hope that answers your question, Director Jackman. Maybe not, but we'll have to continue on. Go ahead, Amy.
Okay, so we're going to move into starting in expenses. On line 55, that waste spotter role was intended to be amalgamated with the landfill attendant role at the start of the year. And so there was no budget assigned to it. However, it wasn't until I think July where we made the transition to make those two roles into one position. So hence why there is some budget associated with line 55 that or some expense where there was no budget. The remainder of the year it will be and in future years it will be all accounted for on line 57. Those two roles are now one. And we had to do that, or we chose to do that because the collective agreement requires us to give breaks, and we were having a very hard time doing that with the limited staff that we have. So by having these two roles be part of the union and be able to substitute each other, we can provide those breaks as required in the collective agreement as efficiently as possible. On line 56, I'm going to point out that the lead hands here, we are going to previously we had 70% of their expenses in the waste service and then 30% in the recycling service. I had broken them out so that I had changed that this year so that it was a simpler accounting exercise, and it was all going to be funded through the waste services. At the discussion at Central earlier this week, they have asked that we continue to split them out so that 70% is in the waste and 30% is in the recycling. We had already issued the agenda, so I didn't make that adjustment here, but because the roles do have some crossover occasionally, it is something I'd like to have consistent across all 3 subregions. So it won't change, it won't impact taxation or anything like that. The funds, what it would do is it would just impact the transfer to the recycling services versus the salary account. So the discussion that we had at Central was that we would make those changes, continue with this percentage split, and if there was a need for further discussion on it, we could have a verbal discussion as a district at the joint meeting in December. So currently this is showing it all accounted in here, this number and the associated benefits and travel and so on. I will adjust if you guys agree with that change back to the previous practice.
Thank you. Director Davidoff has a question on West Lead Hand. Go ahead,
Yes, I
Director
do
Davidoff.
actually, and I'm looking at line item S1010 on salaries for West Lead Hand. I'm looking at 1030, which is the benefits, and I'm looking at the travel. So we have a lead hand. We pay costing West about $48,000 a year for salaries and benefits. And then when I looked at the travel cost, and I'm going, wow, that's a lot of travel. So if you look at the travel cost of projected $17,000, I mean, you do the math on that by kilometer, it's like 10 to 12,000 kilometers, depending how you figure it out. That's 150 hours of traveling time. That's a month of being on the road. So I guess my question,
Director Davidoff, are you on what line are you on?
I'm on the lead hand cost, Chair.
And then that's on line 55 or 56?
It's on 3 lines. So I can wait till the last line to ask my question, or I can ask it now. It's up
I
to
think
you.
he's referring to line 74 travel as it relates to the overall salaries.
Yeah.
Okay, can we wait till we get to line 74 and pose a question there?
Sure, thank you.
Go ahead, Amy.
Yep, thank you. The salaries are obviously the attendant salaries are based on the new collective agreement rates, and in 25 we had the payout that went back as far as I think March 2024. So overtime, we have a limited overtime budget. Benefits are reflective of the number of the salaries in the rows above. Again, and then the health and safety. So those ones are to cover our safety check-ins and all the PPE and variety of equipment that we need at the sites. The directors is another one, both the allowance and the travel. So line 70 and 72. Those, again, these were split between the waste, recycling, and compost, and similar to what I just mentioned with the lead hands, I had allocated in this new budget that we would start just putting 100% in the waste services. This was another one where they've requested that we revert back to the previous practice of splitting them up. And the intention, the director's request for that was, especially in related to the recycling service, is that when we discuss the cost of operating the recycling service to the province or to Recycle BC, that it is fully accounted there. So I understand that intention. So we'll make that change back unless there was any objections. Moving into travel. So this is what Director Davidoff was asking about on line 74. The lead hands was a role that was developed, I think, about 4 years or so ago now, because of a health and safety concern of our staff, the staff taking cash home. And so now the cash stays on site in safes, and the paperwork is done at the site as part of the shift. And the lead hands, one of the primary functions of their role is to drive around and collect the cash from the sites. And we have a limited amount that they can carry at one time and a limited amount that can be stored at a site at one time, which directs how frequently they have to travel around the district and collect that cash. They also are what we call, they are our backup for emergency coverage. So most staff only work within a certain area that their contract is. Anytime they travel outside of that contract area, we will pay mileage, and that is what's on line 75. But the lead hands, they get paid mileage to go anywhere, and they fill shifts anywhere in their subregion. And so the value of that line is to reflect the cash collection, delivery of supplies, and filling emergency shifts. We did get a fleet vehicle that is shared between the field supervisor and the lead hand. So there is a potential. We only had that in place partway through this year, and we haven't had the experience yet to know how much they're able to share that and be able to reduce the personal mileage seen here. But it would be transferred over to the mileage and expenses of operating that fleet vehicle too. It's a little bit lower cost, and that's why we did that transition. But it isn't, they don't, both those roles don't have a fleet. They have to share it. So there still will be mileage associated with that position.
Okay, before you move on, Director David, we had a question on that travel. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
That explanation helps, because what we have is, like, we're spending, approximately 20 grand on travel a year for the lead hand. And so obviously they're using their personal vehicle. And so that's where I was going, is that for $20,000 a year, I get it that buying a vehicle and a fleet vehicle and everything else, but that's an awful lot of travel time, and it's again an efficiency piece. I get the maximum amount of cash that can be carried at a time is a consideration, but it just seems like a really big expense for mileage. And my question was, what are we doing? And Amy explained, well, we're looking at potentially using a fleet vehicle to help offset that cost. And then the other really good thing I heard was, this is also your emergency person, but if the person has to pick up cash, they got to make it to every site before things close at every site, or like, so they're not really available to help out in any way, shape, or form if they're picking up cash once or twice a day from all the sites. So then my question is, if they're doing all this traveling and incurring this mileage expense, how much of their time is actually available to help out?
Through the chair, their pickups are, there's some sites where it's once every week or two. It's not every day. And we actually have a cash collection service for both Groman and Ootischenia through the armored car service, and that's the only locations that they would do that for. So that limits that travel. But no, they're generally at each site once a week, and then sometimes it's maybe even less depending on.
Okay, so supplemental, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so then it's not a daily thing, so they are there only once in a while. So again, then the mileage thing comes into question. I get it. There's, like, we're pretty spread out in West, but this is not just doing West, correct?
This is just doing West.
This is just doing West. Okay. So this lead hand is, do they have they're like in the union, right? And they have a kind of like they're not supervisors. They are just, what is their status when they come to the site? Are they the people that staff go to if they got issues? That's my question.
They're a union position, and they're not the supervisors. We have field supervisors. So the field supervisors the lead hands provide training, and they collect information from the site. They might meet a contractor. They take measurements and photos. They help deliver supplies, but they are not the supervisor.
Okay, so then at the Ootischenia landfill, who's the supervisor? That's my question.
There's a field supervisor for the West subregion.
Okay, and who's traveling? And who is that? Could you share that, or?
Yeah, that's Greg.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so go ahead, Amy, continue, please. Director Davidoff, remove your hand so I know when you want to speak again.
So the learning and professional development, previously the training budget, we are due to have what we call a safety summit. We used to do these and haven't done them much lately, where we bring groups together and do training on asbestos. We have CCAS come and do on invasives and a number of other things. The last year or two, we've had a lot of HR related training, so we're quite excited to have some operational and waste related training brought to the site staff. The admin and office supplies, this is an account that we might want to consider just having not broken out by site any in future years. It's some feedback we got at previous meetings. The communications, those are all the internet and phones and cell phones for the sites. Those are lines 87 through 91. Into advertising, we've reduced the advertising. It is increased a little bit in the next year or two to help with some of the upcoming ICI or institutional, commercial, and industrial organics diversion and regulation. So that's and a lot of that.
Can you move your screen up so we can see it? What line item you're on?
Emma, can you get to line 94? Thank you.
Okay.
So sorry, I was skipping ahead. So insurance, currently these are based on our projected with a 2.4% inflation. Insurance and utilities are ones that I think finance has kind of kept an eye on, and whether the 2.4 is accurate or not, or representative of what we're seeing. And the license and permit, so that's starting on line 102. We've got the lands application fees for Ootischenia. We've got a few water license fees. This is where we also have some of our software. So the drone software is split between the 3 subregions. We also have on line 107, we've got the scale software license that's split between the 3 subregions. A new exercise we went through this year on, I'm jumping around a bit, sorry. 105 was the radio licenses. So a lot of the sites have radios for the attendants to speak with the landfill operators. And then line 106 is what the report that Elaine brought last month about some of the new permits fees. And so we did have expenses already expected there, but they're higher than they would previously have been with those. So we do have the budget representing the proposed costs, because we want to make sure that all the work that we have to do with the ministry does proceed. If those proposed rates changes don't proceed, then we'll be able to adjust his budget accordingly in future years. So getting into consulting fees, starting on 109, we have just a buffer for both Naksup and Ootischenia for a few thousand. So that way, if we have an issue that comes up and we need some engineering support, we can utilize it. have landfill gas assessments occurring again in 2028, so it's increased then. On line 110 and 112, we have the hydrogeological studies. We just completed those a year or so ago, so they're not due again until 2029. And on line 113, that's in regards to some of the support work that we will need to with our design and operation closure plan. We expect to have most of that completed this year, and then some roll over into 26, largely to do with the lands acquisitions. Okay, moving into contracted services. So these have a few modifications for Naksup in regard to moving from a landfill to a transfer station. We are about to do, we're nearing the end of our landfill operations contract. We have a little bit of transition time, and then where we'll have the contractor do a reduced scope and at a reduced cost, and we'll have an RFP coming out. We'll have an RFP coming out shortly for the snow and site maintenance, similar to what we have at all our other transfer stations. So right now that's an estimated cost of around $10,000 a month. It'll have to be updated once we get the results of that procurement in. The bin hauling contract on line 116 was increased after Heidi did the assessment. So that is reflective of the new RFP that we just awarded this year for the west hauling. So a lot of these other ones are fairly consistent with previous years. I don't have anything major built into them. I think when we get down into line 131, there's an estimate, should we proceed, so some of the CBT funding for the rural organics would be installing organics collection at a transfer station where it would either be bear-proof bins or carts within a bear-fenced area that we would essentially become a customer on a commercial haul. So this is down on 131, and we would so that expense would only incur if we initiate that project, and the capital is covered by grant funding, but the ongoing operational costs would not be. So that's a placeholder for now, should that move forward.
So I do have a question from Director Davidoff. What line are you questioning, Director Davidoff?
Yeah, my question has to do with the obviously when Naksup becomes a transfer station instead of a landfill, have we projected all of the revenue from Naksup to the Ootischenia landfill in line item 5? Like I see line item 4 has, in 2025, we project $420,000 of sales of service. And then we're projecting 317 for 2026. But if we're hauling to the Ootischenia landfill, have we baked in the increased revenue and increased tipping fees that we will have from the Naksup haul into sale of services in number 5?
Through the chair, the tipping fees are received at the site it is accepted at, so there would not be any changes to the sales of service.
That would be no different than what we do, for example, with transport of material from Slowdown to Ootischenia for the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Okay, supplemental, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so all the tipping fees all the sales of service and tipping fees are used to help pay for the Naksup site, correct?
Through the chair, all the tipping fees are grouped together as a revenue for the entire service, and the entire service pays for all of it's a communally revenue and expense.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Amy.
Okay, so down on
Don't forget to remove your hand, Director Davidoff.
line 134. So Burton, we have a few of the sites with the legacy landfills are going to require some environmental monitoring. So that's expected to start for our Burton site in 2026. So that's a new line there. On line 136 and 137. So this is the Eco Depot RFP should be issued very shortly for Castlegar, Naksup, and Creston combined. It's a request for expression of interest. Should we not receive any, should we receive interest, then we would proceed with the RFP with the intention that we could potentially have it started in late 2026. There's an expectation, so the budget, I've still budgeted the hazardous waste roundup events in 26 because I don't know that we would have the Eco Depot operational before September, and or have overwhelm a brand new depot with a year's worth of material right at the outset. So should there not be any interest, staff has been starting to collect information about the potential for doing an Eco Depot at our own sites. So there'll be more to come on this as we get results from these expression of interest and procurements. Okay, repairs and maintenance. I'm sure that most of us experience the rising cost of parts and repairs lately, and so that obviously has been felt quite strongly in a lot of our facilities, bin maintenance, vehicle maintenance, and so on. So we have some ongoing repairs to the Grizzly plates at Ootischenia, some repairs to our scale, and otherwise it's just sort of general rolling repairs. You can see on line 147, that's where I've added the expense for the installation of the programmable thermostats that was offset by the grant I noted up in the revenue section. Operating supplies starting on 151 through 158 is just signs and delineators and various supplies for the sites. Equipment on 160 and 161. For the most part, it's to do, we still have the plate readers have been installed at Groman, but we have not had them commissioned yet. So that budget is carrying over to with the intention of getting plate readers at Ootischenia and possibly Naksup, and then portable devices, so Android like cell phones, so that the waste spotters can be recording and changing loads right at the tipping area. And we've got one per sub-region right now in a trial, and they've been quite successful. So we're excited to get that rolled out this year. And then on line 161, there's just a handful of lights and other equipment for a couple of the sites grouped together there. Utilities, as I mentioned, currently is projected at a 2.4% increase, but we have been experiencing higher than that in some locations. As you can see from the projected year end, it was over our budgeted amount. So if finance recommends something higher, that might get adjusted before the budget is finalized. So getting into borrowing. So this on line 173, that's our existing loans from historical projects. Finance gives me that schedule and they're all grouped together. 174 and 175 are the ones that were in here previously and then was moved. And I left the values that got removed that would have been an annual expense, both for interest and principal that were removed because they were moved to reserve funded. The other ones there are the various Ootischenia projects and the legacy landfill, and then the borrowing from the 173 is the Naksup transfer station, and then 180 is the Slocan. So those are the two long-term loans that we just took out earlier this year. Debenture principal reflects what we just spoke about in the interest section. Contribution to reserves. Line 191 is what we're putting into regular reserves. And this year's reserve transfer is healthy, but you'll see 27, 28, and 29 are very, very low amounts. I didn't want to raise taxes higher than what we have projected right now, but I think this is something we need to keep an eye on. And as projects and expenses for some of the capital projects and borrowing costs are better understood after this year with the design and operation closure and so on, I think that's something we need to keep an eye on, because it's not for the level of infrastructure we have. Those are not very healthy contributions. Line 192.
Amy,
yeah.
Amy, if I at that point can add something. So you see that the under the debenture, Amy mentioned that the landfill closure, Naksup, is funded from our landfill liability reserve instead of a loan. So this depletes portion of our landfill liability reserve, or closure reserve, I should say, as we call it. And so we may have to make up some of that, because the money put into that closure reserve for the Naksup closure was lower than what the actual closure cost is going to be. And we used a specific square meter number that works well for larger landfills, but a smaller landfill, the specific landfill closure cost is a lot higher per square meter than it is on a large facility. So in effect, what Amy just said about the contribution to reserve may potentially impact our contributions required for landfill closure reserves. Thank you, Amy.
Yes, thanks. So line 192 is just what Uli was referencing as well. So that is the line where the funds leave the service to go into the landfill closure reserve, which is new this year. Generally, that the funds that leave on line 192, so that 450,000 would normally be allocated up on line 171 as provisions. So now, instead of going out through the service that way, it's going through the contribution to reserves, and then we will see it adding to that reserve balance at the bottom of the budget. And so 450,000 was the previous calculation, and like Uli mentioned, there's a calculation based on what cell we're at and what the capacity of that cell, and basically it's funding the landfill closure for when the landfill is eventually closed. And the Ootischenia, well, the West subregion in general has a whole lot of revisions to come, because we're moving into the optimized footprint, which is almost doubling the lifespan of the landfill and closing a cusp. So this number is a placeholder from previous years, and as Uli mentioned, we're using some of that landfill closure reserve to close Naksup. So this line will needs a lot of inputs to determine what these numbers would be in future years. So currently it's the placeholder from previous years. I suspect we could see some change. It's hard to say which way. As a point two on 192, you can see in the 2025 projected year end, that 2.6 million, that is that money I was speaking about that was in the prior year surplus. That was the landfill closure funds that were previously elsewhere being put back into the service and getting directly placed into that landfill closure reserve. Line 193 is where we see half of the prior year surplus move into the stabilization reserve. So there is a potential that that 424 you can see on line 193 will be adjusted based on the actual prior year surplus. And if we have a need to increase that contribution to the landfill closure reserve, we might adjust those two lines to to instead of having the funds go into the stabilization reserve, go into the landfill closure reserve. It looks like there might have been a few questions.
Yeah, before you continue it further, Director Weatherhead had a question. Go ahead, Director Weatherhead. You have the.
Thank you. I kind of squirreled here. Sorry, Amy. This is good. I am following along. However, I had noticed the Jora cans in the west subregion. In Silverton, New Denver, there's really great, or is it maybe just Silverton? I'm not sure, but is that is something that also runs through our budget? Is somehow the maintenance and the upkeep of those Jora cans? And the only reason I'm asking is because I'm just interested in Jora cans in general for Burton and Edgewood.
Yes, sorry, I missed pointing that out. We have that on in the grants. Where is that? So that is down on
195.
Yeah, 195. So that is the funds that we grant to the Healthy Community Society to support the annual expenses.
Okay, so through a grant, that's really great. Then it's not really something that is part of the budget per se in terms of upkeep of that. Does the community just upkeep that themselves?
It's largely volunteer run, so this helps with sort of their a lot of their lab testing and some support for their administrator and various things. I think we will have an annual report from them shortly, so that would be something we can share at joint.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt with that, but it was just something I noticed. Thank you.
Yeah. So 196 is some also grant funds in relation to the CBT grant funding, and so sharing that through to some of the bins and various things that we're looking at, and those rural and ICI related organic diversion initiatives. The on line 197 was the last payment of the OICP grant. The majority of that was a flow through to the city of Castlegar for their curbside bins. Line 199 to 207. So this was previously just these were all classed as transferred other services. Finance has developed a number of new accounts so that there's clarity on which services everything's going to. So on 199, that's the funds for the project management support. And as you can, I went through the capital expenses, identified which projects project management would assist with, applied a 5% percentage to it, so that's where those numbers are from. It'll really depend on some of the level of involvement, but we did utilize project management for construction inspection, daily inspection for the transfer station, the West Transfer Station projects, and it was very, very cost effective compared to having consultants come and oversee the projects. It looks like on line 200, there's just under 10,000, and I missed moving that into 26. So that actually, I will update that to show that transfer would occur in 26. However, it will stop once the eco depots are established in Castlegar. That essentially is east and west both contribute a few $1,000s for the volume of material that we had done a survey and updated occasionally to determine who is using the Nelson Leaf Depot to bring household hazardous waste throughout the year that are outside of the central subregion. So that's what that one is for. On line 201, that is the transfer to the recycling service. A102, that is the resource recovery service. So that is essentially myself and the resource recovery staff group and all the projects that are more of a district in nature. And that's also where the field supervisors are funded through. Line 202 and 203 are transfers to the A120 organic service, and we'll talk about that one coming up. The first line is in relation to fixed and variable operating costs and capital costs, and those are divvied up based on the volumes that both the subregions are sending. And then on line 203 is essentially the tax subsidy that is not currently being covered by those in lieu of tipping fees. So you can see they are expected to decrease through the plan period, and ideally we get that to zero. The transfer on line 204, are the funds that we are transferring to Central, because Central's fleet and drivers haul the material from Ootischenia to the compost facility for the West Subregion. Line 205 is a transfer to recycling. We'll speak about that more clearly in the next budget. Line 206 is a new allocation to the project management group, and the first couple of years are higher with the expectation that we'll be doing building conditions assessment, other facility assessments to enter all the information into the asset management, and then an ongoing expense to help maintain it and keep it live. And then on line 207, that is a transfer to park services. So we expect to be using our park staff to do some of our invasive weeds management, noted here at Bird and Edgewood, for some non-herbicide treatment. So there'll be both, we'll be using both CCIS and our parks department to manage the invasives at our facilities this year.
So Amy, before you continue on, I do have a question on 2000 on line 204. Yep. Transfer to service 187 for hauling Ootischenia to Central. How does that work?
The operations?
Yes, why is that there? I mean,
Skip, maybe I
yeah, maybe you can explain that. I'm a little bit confused on that.
Give Amy a break, her voice a little break. The compost materials that come from the Castlegar curbside program are going into bins at the Ootischenia landfill. These are roll-off bins, and they are transported through trucks that are within the Central subregion fleet from there to the Central facility in Salmon. And that's the cost to offset the trucking from there to Central and the empty bins back. That's the transfer for that transport.
Okay, so that makes it clear. So Central does the trucking from Ootischenia to their compost facility.
That's currently the only thing that the Central transportation group does outside of the resource recovery activity.
Okay, no,
sorry, Central resource recovery activity.
Thank you. That clarifies it. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
Okay, thank you. So the general admin, IT, and environmental services transfers are the next number of lines, and those values are all given to us by the other services. IT was updated with the new numbers. General admin was not before this agenda was issued, so we just received those. So these are placeholders based on where those services come up with their budgets. So could see some changes. So moving into capital expenditures, line 215, the Naksup transfer station was completed with the installation of the compactors. We're now fully operational in the new tipping area and have stopped landfilling there just in the last week or two. Line 216 is the matching expense for the Naksup CDR diversion pilot, grant funded. And like I mentioned, you'll have a follow-up report on that with some more details in December. We have added some budget here for paving of the access road and some of the tipping area closest to the bins on the top side, largely to maintain the road quality, and also these are high dust locations, which are silica safety concerns for staff and public. So that is a reserve funded project. The Naksup landfill closure on 218. So there's 100,000 in 26 to complete the detailed design and tendering, and then the actual closure works in 2027. And that number was updated with the closure plan that we have just issued or submitted to the ministry. Line 219, this is a placeholder. We have done the preliminary design already. 28 is it would be final design and tendering and construction in 29. I think we've noted this before, where establishing a facility of any kind up there would really need the participation of the municipality. I just don't know that we would have enough volume to do self-haul up there. So that is essentially a placeholder for if and when Naksup was ready to participate in that, as described in our resource recovery plan. So the line 220 is all of the Ootischenia area, tipping area and scale project. We have completed the early design on that and have narrowed it to 3 options. We were hoping to bring it to you in December, but we wanted to get some more comments from project management, and so we've just sent that back to the consultant. So I expect that we will be able to bring it to you in January, ideally. The consultants will have a presentation and discuss the different design options and associated costs. But what the recommended option and the staff preferred option is the budget and presented here, and it is done in 2 phases, where the main area would be constructed 1 year, and then the second year was things like paving and some of the other infrastructure. So it broke it out over the 2 years to break out the costs and just make it a constructible schedule.
So if I may, a question on that one. I believe that was something like Director Davidoff mentioned, the congestion. Will that relieve the congestion that we're presently experiencing in Ootischenia, according to Director Davidoff?
The design that we'll be able to share with you has the second scale, so that makes it so that it doesn't funnel or bottleneck in both in and out traffic on the 1 scale. So that will certainly help. Also looking at different ways to route traffic. So I think it will help with the traffic.
And Director Davidoff has a follow-up on that one. I think he did express it earlier. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, I will be submitting a notice of motion, like to look at some other options, so I'm not going to speak to it now. And my question on this to the chair is that $3 million, are we looking at borrowing, or how are we paying for that?
Through the chair, 1.5 million was what the resource recovery plan authorized us for long-term borrowing. So that would be half funded by that, and the other half was through stabilization reserves.
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead. Do you have a supplemental, Davidoff? No?
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. The next couple of lines are projects that are completed this year. So line 223 are the placeholders for the larger cell development leachate liner and leachate collection. And as I mentioned, that those will be more refined with both with cost and schedule this year. The value of 500,000 in 26 was to complete that detailed or finish the detailed design and tendering for the eventual construction. It also has 200,000 for fence relocation on our south boundary. That is a placeholder and that is reserved. That 500,000 is reserve funded. That is reserved. We may be able to. I don't want to put the fence up partway up the slope. I want to make sure that we put the fence where the optimized footprint's going to want it. So it could actually be rolled. The fence portion might be rolled into the later stages if we can, or if for some of the deciding factor there is authorization from the ministry on our lands application. We've also have 200,000 in there for septic upgrades, which will ideally leave us with a year or two of filling capacity, which is quite of landfilling capacity, which is quite needed at this point. And then Slocan on line 224, that transfer station project was also completed. Line 225 and 226 are funds related to the infrastructure items that related to the Columbia Basin Trust grant that I described above. So those are all grant funded works. Line 227, the Roseberry project was completed. Line 228, we need a litter fence and it was rolled into 26. We weren't able to complete that purchase this year. They were hoping that it would be here before the end of the year, but it's not looking like it. On line 229, that is the sort of more assessment and consulting engineering related costs with our legacy landfills. And so we do have the preliminary assessments done and sort of have our plan preparing for the next stages. So that is what's occurring in 2026. And there's a lot of details in the comments there. Won't go through all of them. And then line 230 is where we actually start to do some of the closure works. And in some of the sites, the requirement for closure is substantially less than we originally thought. We had a placeholder of 1 million per site. And some of the sites just really require litter cleanup, especially at those sites that we still operate as transfer stations. So they're not recommending doing any closure works other than some monitoring or litter cleanup at this point, while we're still, it's considered a Schedule 2 activity. So while we're still completing those activities on that site, we wouldn't move towards the full closure. Line 231 is just a placeholder for rolling stock replacement of roll-off bins. We just purchased a number of bins to situate our needs for the Naksup site turning into a transfer station. So we don't expect that we'll need any in 2026, but we are looking at every 2 years of a two bin rolling stock replacement. Similarly, on 232, rolling stock replacement of the iron grizzly plates that we use as our daily alternate cover. Line 234 is for the monitoring well network expansion that was recommended by the Hydrogeo. It has been delayed due to the archaeological work underway at the site. And so we've just rolled that into 2026. Line 235 is is the bins that we would need to purchase to match with the new tipping area. We currently use these small bins that are picked up by a loader and transported by the loader over to the active area. When we move to the new tipping area, we will be utilizing roll-off bins like we do everywhere else, which is a far more efficient system, especially when we start using, when our active cell is further away. Having something that is a larger bin and more efficient hauling will be preferred. And then the next two lines are the placeholders for Eco Depot. So should either at our sites or another outfit that was going to operate it require any facility upgrades or equipment. And that was just a placeholder with the funds, as an example, that we used for the Nelson Leafs project getting started. So obviously if there's a different situation with how these depots would roll out, that would get modified when we come and ask for approval to proceed. So that is it for the expenses. In the very bottom section there, when we get into the reserves, like I mentioned, we have fairly good regular reserves, but we are trying to use them as much as possible to offset borrowing. But we do deplete them near the end of the plan period, partially due to the low contributions. The landfill closure reserve is the new, so lines 256 to 60. That's the new landfill closure reserve. We're using 1.4 million in 27, and we'll have to determine sort of what that value needs to be at, and once we update those calculations. And then the stabilization reserves. So currently, like entering into 26, they're fairly high. We're using those to offset some of the borrowing, and then any future contributions would depend on any surpluses in future years.
Maybe briefly, so the stabilization reserves were originally put in place with the intent to moderate big changes in the tipping fee up or down, and not have large variations required for taxation, because we have these changes in revenue. They have gotten to a size where they are certainly larger than we needed for that purpose, and that's why we are proposing here in 2026 to make extensive use of these stabilization reserve for capital projects. I think they are in very healthy, at a very healthy level afterwards, with $650,000 for the purpose that they were put in place for. So I think it's fully justified to use them up. One other item, Amy, and maybe you can make a note. There's a change how we handle revenue from interest in reserves. So the reserves are invested throughout the organization as a pool. There's interest coming back from that investment. It's calculated proportionally to each of these reserves and comes back in the service. They are, before we just added them to the reserves, now they are coming in based on auditor requests and requirements as a line item in the future, which we don't have in here yet, I believe, called investment income and interest. That will be account 44020 in the future. It appears that last year we had about a bit over $200,000 in interest income that was at a level of $6 to $7 million. So it will be somewhat lower this year, but I would think you can see about between $150,000 and $200,000 of interest income coming in. That will be landing in this service under that line item once we add it to it. The entry is made after end of year, so we don't have that number until later part of January once finance has been able to calculate these interest incomes.
Okay, we're done with that. I see Director Davidoff has a notice of motion. And is that notice of motion to West Resource Recovery for the next meeting that we have with Director Davidoff, or is that the notice of motion to the Joint Resource Recovery?
Whichever one's first.
Joint is first.
You know, I don't know which was going to be first, but more than likely joint will be first. So, Manager Wolf.
So Chair, can I make my notice of motion? I think Stuart explained procedurally how it works, that anytime during a meeting, we can make a director's notice of motion.
So his notice of motion, my question was, is it to West Resource Recovery or is it to Joint Resource Recovery for staff to investigate that?
I believe the director's request was for the next meeting coming up, which would be Joint Resource Recovery.
Okay. So I don't know how that notice of motion would work at our West Resource Recovery if it's the Joint Resource Recovery. So we may reflect it in the minutes and you will bring something back, joint?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, this chair staff got this now?
Yes, I see Manager Wolf nod his head and he said yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it's recorded in chat. So we'll give Manager Wolf a minute here to take a look at that. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I just went over to the screen to read it.
Okay, we'll move right on to the next. We're done with West Resource Recovery Refuse Disposal Financial Plan, and the next item on the agenda. Let me find the agenda first. It's buried amongst the paperwork.
Chair, would you entertain having a short break before we move into the section?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I get too involved in this and I forget about our break. So how about a 10-minute break, and we're at 2:36. So we come back at 2:46.
Great.
And Director David, please remove your hand. Otherwise, I can't see when you put your hand up or not. You're doing here. And I'm gonna. No, not yet. I'm trying to find that point.
Yeah, you're close. It's like a video game with
If you guys have started again, we can't hear you.
No.
Yeah.
Sorry for the late.
Chasing a mouse.
We had a problem. We lost our cat and our mouse just ran away. So we're back at the meeting here, and the next item on the agenda is Service 118, Recycling Program West Subregion. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. So what you can see off the hop here is our projected year-end incentives for this service are sizably over what we were expecting. It's a good problem to have. It did cause some question and concern with staff as to why, because Central was quite a bit lower than expected, and East was a little lower than expected. And we had previously been doing all of our work under one job, and it was a lot of work for finance to separate all the different incentives based on where the material was coming from. And we finally were successful in getting them to split us into 3 different jobs, one for each subregion. And so there was some concern that West was allocated some incentives from a depot that wasn't theirs. But we did some backtracking and investigating, and it appears that this is truly what West is getting. I think what we can attribute it to is we applied a general rate inflator based on sort of an average of what the new rates we started to receive in January as 118% increase. And all of those are based on each different material has different rates. And also you have a different rate depending on the type of, or the volume of the tonnage received at the depot. So lower volume, lower tonnage sites get a higher rate. However, and I think that maybe better explains why Central is a little bit under West. I think what it also is we applied that 118% inflator on the 2024 tonnages. And 2024, we had the big construction projects underway at the transfer stations, and we also had the fires in the valley. So I think that the tonnages received in 24 were lower than average. And so we applied that inflator based on a lower average, and now we're back up to regular tonnages or more average tonnages. And therefore we received essentially about 100, we're expecting over 100,000 more in incentives than budgeted. So moving forward down to line 9, you can see the transfer from the waste service is going down, and is fairly offset in 26 from that prior year surplus that you'll see on line 11. So moving forward, it looks like I did add the lead hand back in here. Sorry, I didn't change it in the waste service for some reason. So that we would be continuing as past practice. So that's line 16 to apply 30% of the lead hand, both salaries, benefits, and travel, and the lines below. Yeah, I mean, there's not a significant amount of change going on through a lot of the lines. I think I'm just looking to see if I have any items to note. Yeah, not a significant change in any of the accounts based on past years. A lot of it's just based on projected, plus a 2.4 in inflator. unless the value is known based on the contract. The contribution to reserve, so way down on line 62, is at 5,000, and I think annually, and I think as we've noted with the asset management program, we could see some modifications to what are annual contributions, but the recycling services don't really have huge assets other than the sea cans, which have a fairly long life if we don't let people back into them too often. And the transfer to asset management, I'll just point this out, we didn't divvy that contribution to that service into the allocation services. We left that entirely within the waste service, as recommended by finance and discussed with senior management. So there will be assets to consider in these, but not significant like the waste services. Any questions about all the accounts that I just breezed over? There really wasn't anything of note that I wanted to point out, but I wanted to make sure I left the opportunity to ask questions. Again,
David, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I just want to add the $5,150 to the 17,000. So we're paying our lead hand $23,000 a year just for mileage. So that's something I think that we need to look at to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So noted.
Thank you.
Through the chair, I believe the value that's in travel here would reduce the 17,000. So that wasn't adjusted, and I will make that correction.
Okay. Now you know why I'm raising it, because it was I look at the dollars and the time spent. So just I think my point was made. Thank you, Chair.
As I mentioned in the waste service, the IT service transfer was updated, but the general admin and environmental service and resource recovery are placeholders based on previous years. So those will have to get updated as those budgets get finalized. And then on line 72 here, we did allocate a portion of the Ootischenia transfer station upgrade capital expense to the transfer station, or sorry, the recycling area. I don't believe that is considering having it paved. So if we elect to do that, that would excuse me, that would change that cost, but we wanted to allocate the appropriate a portion of that project. It's a placeholder amount because I did not have the opportunity to engage with the consultant on sort of all the different line items that could be associated with the transfer station. So that is a placeholder for now. That would be it for the recycling service, unless there's any other questions.
So any questions on the recycling? Director Jackman, are you still with us?
I am, Chair, yes. And I wasn't going to ask my recycling question from yesterday because I already made the point about that reallocation of the core depots versus the other depots that we have. So I think staff already had that to work with.
So maybe you can pose your concern that you mentioned about that, so the members of West Resource Recovery know what you were talking about.
Okay, then I will. I guess that is fair instead of just waiting for it to come up at joint. Right now, we have to have our core depots versus our satellite depots in integers. Like we know to have a half a satellite depot or a half a core depot, we have one of each. So when we were allocated through Recycle BC a fixed number of core depots, we looked at where most logically we could benefit in terms of maximize the revenues and the volumes, because the core depots have a higher, have more of the cost paid through Recycle BC, whereas our satellite depots, we have to pay for our own transportation from site to site. We have to pay for more. So when we did that, West got more than some theoretical share of the core depots than East or Central. And so there was a transfer from the funds that we received from Recycle BC for the material we collect. There was a transfer of a portion of that back to East and Central. So I just suggested that now, because the amount that we're paid for small satellite depots is more per ton than for the core depots with this new schedule that Recycle BC's come out with, that needs to be revisited. And maybe East would get less money from West because we're getting more money now from Recycle BC for a couple of our few small transfers, our few small satellite depots. So it's something to be reviewed. Listening to what Amy just provided here, the fact that West is actually doing more work diverting this material is a new interesting wrinkle. It may not work out quite the way I was thinking while I was sitting in listening to the Central Resource Recovery. But anyway, we are getting better payment for our small satellite depots, more fair payment than we were a year ago in East. So I would see that we may end up getting a little bit less of a transfer of the wealth out of West. And that's something staff can work on over the next year, because I'm sure it's going to take more than 5 minutes to figure out.
So thank you, Director Jackman. And that's exactly, what you were suggesting at Central at that meeting. So I just wanted you to repeat that so the directors of West Resource Recovery know that the transfer fees are going to be looked at by staff and readjusted if required. Thank you. Okay, so moving on to the next item, which is organics. Go ahead, Amy. Are you still with us? You're muted if you are.
Thank you. Yeah, so service A120 shared with Central and West. Line 1 is our tipping fees at the Central facility. So those are, at this point, largely the tipping fees from the RDKB. We expect to see some increase in future years with the ICI regulation and the acceptance of biosolids for composting. The user fees on line 3, that is the revenue from sales of the finished compost. And currently we're directing the sales of the compost from both the locations that we sold it from this year, both at Central and at Ootischenia. The proceeds from borrowing, we had 100,000 on line 9. That was short-term borrowing to complement what we had. There were some funds that had been carried over in the prior year surplus for a few years in this service, specifically to manage the compost leachate pond water. And so whether or not that is an expansion of the pond or a secondary pond or some sort of treatment, we've got some new cost estimates that were we had around 200 or 220,000 earmarked for that amount or that project, and the engineering design for the second pond is quite a bit over that. So we're in the process of assessing options. So that 100,000 is to complement the funds that we have for that capital expense in the service right now. Also on line 14, we don't have a significant amount of reserves in this service, but it was transferring some out of the reserves to help fund that. The purchase of the Kubota, which is a little backhoe unit that we purchased or in the process of purchasing off the construction crew, the RDCK construction crew.
Sure.
Yes, Director Jackman, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually on the pond, and Amy just went over the potentially proceeds for borrowing. line 9, the 100,000 might be towards the pond. I wanted to ask this at Central, and I didn't because the meeting ran so long. And I also did hear Amy just say they're looking at options for the pond. Whether or not we have too much water and we need a bigger pond, higher, larger area for evaporation, some way to manage this, or we start treating water, or all these different things, has been on my mind for both sites, East and Central. What came to mind was we're right now, I'm sure, optimizing the carbon and nitrogen balance to produce a good Class A compost. But is there an advantage to using more wood at some point, even though it may not produce the optimal compost, using more wood if it's reasonably dry in order to absorb some of that water and retain it within the compost itself? I know sometimes when we buy bagged products at different stores, some of it's very light and some of it's very heavy. I would assume the product with more wood fiber in it is able to absorb more water. So is that something that the operator can be looking at, that maybe seasonally we would use more wood fiber, hold more water within the compost, puts the hauling cost for whoever buys it up a bit, but it gets rid of the water as part of the compost? Is that worth analyzing through the next year?
I try stab at that. So within very limited parameters, you can change your mixture, but you are stuck with your range of carbon nitrogen ratio. Otherwise, you're not getting proper composting. The wood materials, or the garden waste, largely is our carbon source. You can up it somewhat, the recipe, but you can't exceed certain thresholds in the carbon nitrogen ratio, meaning the ratio between your wood waste and your food waste. So that's what we are stuck with. The other piece to that is, and I think we actually may have a slightly higher carbon nitrogen ratio at our central facility than we had before with our contract operated Crescent facility. But in the end, too, your carbon source is not going to be fully used up. When you do then your processing to a finished compost, you take some of that back out and it comes back into the composting process. So there's a finite piece to that as well. And you have to have your compost for the processing, for the final processing, at a certain moisture content. Otherwise, that final processing will not work either. We are already limited to a certain season in the year where we can do it. Has to have a certain dryness in order to do it. And then there is requirements for Class A compost in the maximum moisture threshold that you need to stay within.
Thank you.
Supplemental, Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
I really do appreciate that. I was just regretting that, I saw a figure of $400,000 for a pond. And if we'd thought of that a few years back, we could have had 2/3 of it paid by a grant. But obviously, this has been manicured or looked at closely already. And if I understand correctly, some of the wood chip or fiber comes out during the screening process, I guess, and that ends up not going out as compost. So thanks. I was just hoping we could avoid a few $100,000 on a pond.
If I may follow up on that, we have the same concern. We, in fact, expressed that concern to the original company doing this design. They upped actually the size of these ponds already based on our comments, and they were still undersized. What a somewhat larger pond may allow us is relatively inexpensive treatment, which can be evaporation methods. There is evaporation cannons, if you want to, that you can do, but you have to have a minimum size of pond in order to contain what you do in final small droplets to contain that within the lagoon. So there's many directions we are looking at in this, including treatment at the septic facilities, including on-site treatment, including evaporation, enhancement. But one way or another, we'll see a cost. What that looks like as final cost, we don't know yet, but we certainly look in multi-directional solutions for this problem.
Thank you. I hope that answers your question, Director Jackman. Yep. Good. Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. So line 16 through 20 are the transfers from Central and West Waste Services to fund the program, either through the line 18 for West is the covering the capital fixed and variable operating costs. And then line 20, looks like we missed 19 there. Line 20 is the, as I mentioned in the waste service, the amount left over required to balance. And that's shared 50-50 with Central. And then on line 22 is the prior year surplus, and as I mentioned, majority of that is the funds that are being carried through this year after, and we keep expecting to spend it. So we could put it in a reserve, but if by chance it doesn't get spent in 26 and it's a longer term plan, we might want to consider doing that. But the intention is that those funds would be used in 26 to deal with the leachate pond water, whether that's another pond or a treatment system or something. Line 28, we have the one operator there with a backup operator, and the operator at Central, because we're about to start in-house operations at Creston. There was some of that operator's time allocated for the A119 to provide support. So that's the East Compost Service, to provide support to that new in-house operation. So our compost operator in Central will be providing some assistance and both in the case of them going over to Creston, as well as having the operator from Creston come over and oversee how the operations at Central are completed, so that they can gain that training.
The Director Davidoff has a question before you continue, Amy. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, it's on the revenue side. Thank you, Chair. So tipping fees are kind of not increasing and decreasing over 5 years. Can you kind of explain that trend and why that's decreasing? Because you'd think that there's more composting happening, so our tipping fees would go up. So is this just what's happening at the site, or is this overall, or is
The tip
through the chair?
Okay, thank you. Through the chair. So the tipping fees are, well, line 1 is the tipping fees for that site, and so those are increasing. The tipping fees that you're referencing, I am assuming, are the ones that I've referenced on line 18. And the reason why they go down is because some of the short-term some of the expenses that we're carrying start to drop off, and for the most part that's borrowing. So once some of the short-term borrowing drops off, it's less expensive to operate the facility.
Yeah, I'm looking at line 26, Chair.
Okay.
And Amy, is that that's the line that I'm kind of trying to get an explanation for, is and is what you said the reason for why the projections are lower, trending low?
So that line is a combination of line 1, line 3, line 16, and line 18. So it's all of the revenues associated with the tipping fees at the scale, the compost sales, and then the equivalent of tipping fees transferred from Central and West. And so the reason why they go down is exactly what I just mentioned, is that the expenses for operating the service, namely the borrowing, starts to drop off.
Okay.
Directed, you will see this when we get to line 86, 87, 90, and 92, which total $78,000. That's the cost of short-term financing interest. So maybe we refer to that again when we get to these lines, because that is essentially the largest portion of your drop that you're seeing here.
Yeah, supplemental, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, on the revenue side, how much revenue are we losing because Nelson's not part of the program? Through the chair.
If I may, you as West Subregion, nothing at all, essentially, because the Central Subregion is forced to make up for the portion of feedstock and revenue that was assigned or attributed formally to come from the Central Subregion. So the financial burden is to the very largest degree on the shoulders of the Central Subregion, because they have to subsidize the program significantly more because of the lack of volume of feedstock coming to that facility based on the decision of Nelson going a different direction with the food cycle program.
Do you have any idea of how much that revenue could have been?
Through the chair, I mean, I would argue that the cost per ton to process at the facility is higher for everyone because we have lower volumes.
Yeah.
The city volumes, we were essentially, it was a third with the RDKB, the West and Central. The city of Nelson is just about to make a conclusion and a recommendation based on their pilot for the food cycler. So we'll learn shortly what their intentions are moving forward. And so either which way, if they continue with the food cycler or move to curbside, I do expect we will see increased volumes because they've only been doing their organics diversion in a portion of the community. So either which way, it will roll out to the entire community. And so we will see some increased volumes from them. I haven't added that into any of the projections because it's really hard to tell what that might be, because it's hard to confirm how they're going to, if they keep with the food cycler, how they're going to manage the end product and sort of what volume we'll expect to see or what volume would be managed at home.
Thank you, Chair.
There's a couple of other elements in the overall equation. There is the educational and ultimately potentially enforcement piece of ICI waste from larger producers in the ICI sector that we anticipate at some point to come to us. And then the largest question is ultimately, and that's one component of the expected revenue picture, was biosolids. Again, we are having to do a pilot first. If that is successful, then that would add significantly to the revenue picture. If it is not successful, then we have somewhat of a difficulty of ongoing subsidies to make up for that expected revenue.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay. I'm going to skip down to line 66. I don't think that there's anything substantial in the other ones, but I'll obviously welcome any questions. On line 66, that is the rent. We hire a screener to do the compost processing. in the early stages of these budgets, we actually had a capital item to purchase a screener. We took it away and moved it to this account so that we would rent the equipment, which is what we did in 25. It worked quite well, but we are investigating screener units. There was it almost cost as much to mob the piece of equipment here as it did to rent it. And it would be ideal to have a piece of equipment shared by this compost service as well as the East, especially because, as Uli mentioned, it has to be, it can't be too wet to process through the screener. So to have one on site where we could just process material as conditions and stockpiles allow would be a lot more efficient than trying to time it perfectly with the moisture content and the weather and various things like that. So we do plan to continue in 26 with our current system where we would rent the piece of equipment, use it at both facilities. But we have done a trial with a new unit in Creston that actually was manufactured in Creston. And so just trialing these equipment to make sure if we do end up moving towards a purchase, that we have the right piece of equipment for the material that we're trying to produce. So we're just sort of in the trial stages of that. So we could see that line 66 transfer into a capital expense that's shared with the two services. So again, not a ton of changes in the other accounts here. So when we get down into line 84 in short-term financing, so you can see that both the short-term financing for the facility and the short-term financing for the loader drop-off, we are expecting to add the short-term financing, that 100,000 referenced up above for borrowing for the compost leachate management, and that could change if the project is more or less expensive, then that would be reflected in the borrowing repayment. But as you can see, especially on say like line 93, currently we're just under 300,000 with our financing, and that drops down to 20,000 in 28. So pending what this compost leachate costs us, that the facility expenses go down quite a bit in later mid plan period, I guess. Line 99, we are doing 5,000 reserve contributions, and then once we stop with the short-term financing, we've increased that contribution to reserve to 45,000. Again, the asset management plan will better inform what an appropriate value would be for that. Line 101 is the transfer to the project management group, and that's to support any of the works that we do for the compost pond. We have, when we did the recycling, I said that we weren't doing the asset management transfer in the allocation services. I was incorrect. We didn't do it to the recycling because they have not significant assets, but we did allocate it to the two compost services because they do have fairly significant assets with the mixer and the Quonset hut and all the blowers and so on. So that one we did actually add some for the contribution to the asset management program. Line 103, the kiosk is installed, and I think it should be active any day now, and that is shared between this service and the S187, the central service, and that's so that commercial traffic can come through any of our operating days, not just on the Wednesdays and Saturdays that we have an attendant there. Line 104 is a transfer to resource recovery A102 service. And same as what I mentioned with the other ones, the IT service was updated with their new budgets, but the other transfers are pending those budgets getting finalized. There was a couple of items on line 114 and 115 that were completed in 25. Line 116 is the placeholder for the pond management, however, which way that goes. Line 117 is the construction backhoe that I had mentioned. And we expect that this may be used by the S187 service as well, but the asset had to sit in one service, couldn't be split. So this is the service we expect to use it the most, and then we will develop a charge out so that if other services utilize it, we will do a transfer. I didn't add that in at the moment because we don't have that experience to understand what we'll be using it for with the other services we do with this one. So
Director Davidoff has a question before you move on, Amy. Go ahead, Director Davidoff.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I guess I just need staff's opinion through the chair on the pond project. I know in 2027 we finished paying off the short-term loan, and that's a $227,000 a year expense. So is moving the pond project to 2028 something that we could look at, or is that not viable through the chair?
Through the chair, it is something that we should be managing sooner than later. We do not want the pond to overflow, and there's limited capacity. For example, in Creston, the pond also is undersized, and we pump that and send it to the wastewater treatment plant. It's quite expensive. In Central here, we don't have a wastewater treatment facility that is able or willing to take this. So at present time, so we have been, when we've had overflow periods, we've added the water to our septic pits, which is not ideal because it impacts the capacity there. So this is something we can't continue to manage. You're not supposed to have discharge under the organic matter recycling regulation. And so I don't feel like it's something we can push off into years down the road.
Supplemental, Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, staff mentioned speaking to the designers of this site. As like I guess I'm going to ask the obvious question. What have the designers said about the design? Through the chair.
Once you accept the design, it is relatively difficult to go back. We would have to engage legally with them, is my guess, to challenge the design and ultimately go after their it's tricky. I don't think I want to entertain that discussion here in open meeting too much.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead, Amy.
Okay, there's on line 119, there's an irrigation project that did not proceed yet, so that's just rolled over. 120, that is establishing sanitary facilities at the compost facility, which was a requirement if we're going to embark on composting biosolids. So that is largely completed. And then line 121, again, well, that was that placeholder where we were looking at a purchase, but I don't have a budget at present time until we know what and if we're going to purchase something versus renting it. So the reserves down below, you can see that I have utilized some in 26. Yeah, that's it for that service.
Okay, any further questions on the composting? Seeing no further questions, we're at the end of this, and I'd like to thank Amy for struggling through this. Really appreciate it, and I hope you can get better.
Thank you.
So we're at public time now, and I believe we have an observer on the line. So if you have any questions, now's your opportunity. So I'll wait a few more minutes. Okay, no questions from the public. And I'd like to thank the directors for participating in this meeting. We finished in fairly good time. Amy, Uli, thank you very much for answering all the questions, and I will call for adjournment. Motion to adjourn. Nobody wants to adjourn? We have a motion on the floor here in the boardroom and a seconder. I will second the motion. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a good evening.
Thanks, Amy. You did a great job.
It was so interesting. Director Newell didn't even leave.
Mute us if you can. It's probably better at this than I